Come home now. My husband's voice cracked with panic over the phone, shattering the quiet of my afternoon. I raced back through the pouring rain, speeding past flashing police cruisers, believing I was rushing to save my family. I was wrong. The blood pooled on our living room floor was not the aftermath of a burglary, but the opening act of a staged nightmare designed to destroy me. My name is Alara Vance, and until that afternoon, my world was defined by the precise application of solvent and the quiet resurrection of history. At 38 years old, I had spent the better part of a decade at Vanguard Heritage, restoring life to fading masterpieces. I was currently hunched over a 19th century oil landscape. My breath held tight in my chest as I removed a layer of yellowed varnish with a cotton swab no larger than a match head. The silence in the preservation lab was absolute, a sanctuary of dust motes and chemical smells that I cherished. Then the phone rang. The sound was violent against the stillness, a shrill demand that made my hand jerk just fractions of an inch from the canvas. I pulled the device from my apron pocket, frowning when I saw the caller ID. It was Julian. My husband never called during work hours unless it was an emergency, and a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach before I even slid the answer button. Julian is everything, Alara? Oh, God. Alara. His voice was unrecognizable, a jagged sound that scraped against my ear. He was hyperventilating, the breaths coming in short, wet gasps that signaled terror. You have to. Just come home. Come home, now. The line went dead before I could ask a single question. Julian, I shouted at the silent screen. I dialed him back immediately, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly dropped the phone. It went straight to voicemail. The silence of the lab suddenly felt suffocating, pressing in on me like deep water. I didn't bother to clean my brushes or lock the solvent cabinet. I grabbed my purse and ran. Seattle was living up to its reputation, drowning in a relentless gray downpour that turned the highway into a blur of red taillights and slick asphalt. My wipers slashed back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the rain, their rhythm matching the frantic pounding of my heart. Why was he screaming? Was it a fire? An accident? My mind immediately leaped to the person I loved most in this world. Mia. My daughter was 16 years old and should have been home from school by now. The thought of her hurt or terrified made me press harder on the gas pedal, risking a ticket I didn't care about. I turned into our neighborhood, usually a sanctuary of manicured lawns and six-figure incomes. Today, it looked like a crime scene. My breath hitched in my throat. 3 police cruisers were parked haphazardly across my driveway, their blue and red lights cutting through the gloomy afternoon, reflecting off the wet pavement like fractured stained glass. I slammed the brakes and threw the car into park, ignoring the way the tires screeched against the curb. I stumbled out into the rain. The neighbors were already there, a cluster of vultures under black umbrellas. I saw Mrs. Higgins and the man from across the street, their eyes tracking me. They didn't look worried. They looked pitying. They looked hungry for the tragedy unfolding on my doorstep. I hated them in that moment. Mom. The scream came from the garage. Mia sprinted toward me, her long, dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. She looked like a ghost, her skin waxy and pale. I opened my arms, ready to crush her against me, to shield her from whatever horror had descended upon us, but she didn't embrace me. She slammed into my chest with her hands, stopping me in my tracks. Mia, honey, what happened? Where is Dad? I grabbed her wrists, trying to steady her. She was shaking violently, her teeth chattering not from the cold, but from shock. She looked over her shoulder at the front door, then back at me, her eyes wide and glassy. Mom, don't go in there, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Dad, he doesn't want you to see. Please, just stay here. There was fear in her eyes. Yes, but beneath the terror, I saw something else. Something sharp and guarded. She was not just protecting me from a gruesome sight. She was hiding something. Move, Mia, I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. No, Mom. Please, I pushed my daughter aside, perhaps too roughly, my maternal instinct to comfort overridden by a primal need to know. I marched up the walkway, the rain soaking through my blouse, chilling me to the bone. I reached for the brass handle of the front door, my hand slipping on the wet metal before I finally gripped it tight. I swung the door open and stepped over the threshold, leaving the rain behind and walking straight into hell. The air inside was heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from the metallic tang of fresh blood and the acrid, stinging scent of burnt gunpowder. My home, usually a pristine sanctuary of minimalist design and neutral tones, had been transformed into a slaughterhouse. The sleek, mid-century modern furniture was overturned, the glass coffee table shattered into 1,000 glittering diamonds across the hardwood, and the silence was heavier than the noise of the storm outside. In the center of the living room, a body lay face down. It was a man I had never seen before. He was sprawled across the ivory wool rug I had imported from Milan just 6 months ago, the fabric now greedily drinking up a widening pool of crimson. The stain had spread outward like a dark halo, ruining the purity of the room. I stared at the body, unable to look away. He was massive, wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket, his motionless hand still clutching the handle of a hunting knife. Ilara. The voice came from the corner near the kitchen island. Julian was sitting on the edge of the sofa, his posture collapsed and small. He held a bag of frozen peas to his temple, his knuckles white against the plastic. His white dress shirt was speckled with red spray, a gruesome confetti that stood out against the crisp cotton. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and had not yet realized he was still burning. Standing over him was Sheriff Cobb, a man whose presence usually brought comfort to our quiet suburb. Today, he looked grim. He just came at me. Ilara, Julian stammered, his voice pitching high with hysteria. I heard the glass break. I came down. He had a knife. I didn't have a choice. I just grabbed the gun from the safe and I looked back at the body. The intruder was a giant, his neck thick with muscle and covered in dark, aggressive tattoos that crept up from his collar. He looked like he could snap a baseball bat in half. Then I looked at Julian. My husband was a man who got winded bringing groceries up the driveway, a man whose hands were built for typing code, not violence. The disparity between the two men was almost comical. It seemed physically impossible that Julian had overpowered this beast. Julian finally looked up and saw me standing in the entryway. A sob ripped through his throat. Ilara, he scrambled up from the sofa and rushed toward me. He threw his arms around me, burying his face in my neck. I instinctively wrapped my arms around him, expecting the familiar warmth of his embrace, but he felt wrong. His body was rigid, vibrating with a tension that felt less like relief and more like adrenaline. He squeezed me too hard, and when he pulled back, his eyes darted to the side, refusing to meet mine. "It is okay. Mrs. Vance," Sheriff Cobb said, stepping forward and placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "It looks like a clear-cut case of self-defense. Your husband is a hero. You are lucky to be alive." I nodded slowly, playing the part of the shocked wife, but my brain was already shifting gears. At Vanguard Heritage, my job was to look at a painting and see the layers beneath the surface, to find the cracks in the varnish that others missed. I looked past the blood and the chaos. Near the hallway, a Ming Dynasty replica vase lay in pieces. I stared at the shards. If it had been knocked over during a struggle, the debris field would be scattered in the direction of the impact, but the pieces were clustered in a tight circle, as if it had been dropped straight down. It felt staged. I walked past the body, my eyes scanning the perimeter, The back door, the supposed point of entry, was closed. I moved closer. The wood around the lock was smooth and unblemished. There were no splintered fragments, no scratches from a pry bar. I glanced at the smart home panel on the wall. The green light was steady. System disarmed. It did not say bypass or breach. It said disarmed. That meant someone had typed in the 4-digit code. We always set the alarm. Always. A flash of light caught my eye near the stone fireplace. It was a cell phone, lying screen up on the hearth, just inches from the dead man's outstretched hand. It must have belonged to the intruder. The screen illuminated for a brief second, likely a notification waking it from sleep mode. Before it went dark again, I saw the icon. It was a distinctive purple chat bubble, the logo for an encrypted messaging app called Whisper. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the rain. I knew that icon because I had seen it on Julian's phone just 2 days ago. He had told me it was for work, a new secure channel for his development team. Why did a violent home invader use the same corporate messaging app as my husband, Mrs. Vance Cobb asked, his voice bringing me back to the room. I need a glass of water, I whispered, turning away to hide the dawn of suspicion in my eyes. The narrative was perfect, but the details were screaming a different story. By the time the coroner's van pulled away, taking the body of the stranger with it, our home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a mausoleum. The police had stripped the yellow tape, leaving behind only the copper scent of blood and a lingering, heavy silence. The house was cold, but it was a chill that the heating system could not touch. That night, Julian swallowed 2 sleeping pills and collapsed into a deep, chemical slumber almost immediately. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his rhythmic breathing. It sounded too peaceful for a man who had just taken a life. My mind refused to shut down. It kept replaying the events of the evening like a film reel that had jammed and was burning in the projector. I thought about Mia. Before my sister came to pick her up, I had tried to hold her again. She had flinched. It was a subtle movement, but to a mother, it was as loud as a scream. She had not looked at the body, and she had not looked at the police. She had kept her eyes glued to the floor, terrified. But when Julian had tried to say goodbye to her, she had actually taken a step back. She was not afraid of the intruder. She was afraid of her father. I slipped out of bed, the hardwood floor biting at my bare feet. I needed to know why. I crept downstairs to the living room. The moonlight filtered through the sheer curtains, illuminating the dark stain on the rug. I walked past it to the smart home control panel mounted near the kitchen. I tapped the screen to wake it up and accessed the event log. My breath hitched. System disarmed user Julian. Time 4:20 p.m. The emergency call had come in at 4:30. The alarm had not been bypassed or hacked. It had been turned off by Julian's personal code exactly 10 minutes before the attack supposedly started. I turned away from the panel, my heart hammering against my ribs. I paced the room, my eyes scanning the floor where the struggle had taken place. Something glinted under the edge of the sofa, caught in the deep shadow of the furniture. I reached down and pulled it out. It was a cufflink, heavy, gold, and inlaid with black onyx. I turned it over in my palm. Julian did not own anything this ostentatious. He wore simple silver knots if he wore cufflinks at all. And the intruder, that man had been wearing a leather jacket and flannel. This belonged to someone else, someone wealthy. My suspicion turned into a frantic need for data. I opened Julian's laptop, which was sitting on the kitchen island. I guessed his password on the second try. It was still his birthday. I logged into our joint bank account. I scrolled through the recent transactions, and my stomach dropped. There was a withdrawal from 2 days ago, a counter withdrawal for $50,000. I stared at the screen. $50,000 in cash. He had never mentioned this. We discussed every major purchase, every investment. Where was that money? The sun rose on a sleepless night. When Julian came downstairs, The transformation was terrifying. The trembling, broken man from the night before was gone. In his place was a man who seemed bizarrely energized, almost manic. "We need to call the cleaners," he said, pouring coffee with a steady hand. "And the real estate agent. I can't live here anymore. Ilara, not after this. We should list the house today. Get a fresh start." He was moving too fast. He wanted to erase the scene before the paint was even dry. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice level. "I checked the alarm logs last night. The system was disarmed 10 minutes before the break-in. You used your code." The coffee pot slammed down onto the counter. He spun around, his face twisting into a mask of ugly indignation. Are you serious right now?" he spat, his eyes wide and aggressive. "I just killed a man to protect us. I was in shock. Maybe I turned it off to let the dog out, or maybe I was just confused. I can't believe you are interrogating me. I saved your life. He was gaslighting me. I saw it in the way he projected his anger, turning his guilt into my failure as a wife. I realized then that if I pushed him, he would close off completely. Or worse. I'm sorry," I said, forcing my shoulders to slump. I'm traumatized. Julian. I'm looking for answers where there aren't any." "You're right. We should move." He relaxed instantly, believing the lie. "It's okay, babe. We just need to get through this." He went upstairs to shower, leaving his study door open. I slipped inside. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw the file folder sitting carelessly on top of a stack of bills. It was his life insurance policy. I opened it. The document was dated just last week. The coverage had been doubled, but it was the line at the bottom that made the room spin. The primary beneficiary had been updated. It was no longer Mia Vance. It was now a trust under a name I did not recognize, controlled by an executor whose name had been redacted. He wasn't just hiding a crime. He was planning an exit, and I was in the way. I needed a ghost to catch a liar. So I called Rook. He was a private investigator I had met years ago through a client who needed a discreet background check on a potential buyer for a Renaissance masterpiece. Rook operated in the shadows, a man who followed the philosophy of leaving absolutely no footprints. We met in a dim diner on the outskirts of the city, far from the prying eyes of my neighborhood. Rook slid a manila folder across the cracked laminate table. "The man on your rug was named Cale Vance." "No relation," Rook said, his voice gravelly and low. "Though the irony is rich. He was a mid-level enforcer for a loan shark ring in Tacoma. Extortion, assault, debt collection. He was not a burglar. Ilara. He was a hired hammer." I opened the folder, staring at the mugshot of the man who had bled out in my living room. "It gets worse," Rook continued, tapping a printout of phone records. "I pulled the logs from a burner phone found in Cale's pocket. He and your husband have been trading calls for 3 months. These weren't random dials. They were scheduled, weekly check-ins." The room spun. The narrative of the terrified homeowner defending his family evaporated, replaced by cold, premeditated association. Julian knew him. I went back to the house, our house, which now felt like a stage set for a horror movie. While Julian was in the shower, scrubbing away imaginary blood, I logged onto his desktop. He was careful, but he was not an expert. I ran a recovery program on his digital trash bin. Hundreds of files were gone forever, but a thread of emails remained, salvaged from the abyss. They were from a sender named Sienna. I expected love letters. I expected to find out he was cheating. What I found was far colder. The accounts are bleeding too fast. If we don't plug the hole by the quarterly audit, we are both finished. Bring the cash to clear the debt. Kyle is getting impatient. I forwarded everything to Rook. Within an hour. He texted me back. Sienna was not a mistress. She was the chief financial officer at the development firm partnering with Julian's company. She was ambitious, sharp, and apparently Julian's partner in a massive embezzlement scheme. Later that afternoon, Julian announced he was going to see a trauma therapist. He put on his best tragic face, kissing me on the forehead with trembling lips. I need to process what I did," he stammered. I waited until his car turned the corner. Then I followed him in my sedan, keeping 2 cars between us. He did not go to the medical center. He drove 40 minutes south to a sprawling, rusted junkyard. I parked behind a stack of crushed cars, watching through the rain-streaked windshield. Julian got out. He looked small against the towering piles of scrap metal. A dark sedan pulled up, and a man I did not recognize stepped out. Julian handed him a thick brown envelope. My husband looked terrified, his head whipping around as if he expected the police to jump out from the heaps of trash. "Take it." "Just take it and tell them I'm good for the rest," Julian said, his voice carrying over the wind as I lowered my window an inch. The man laughed, a harsh sound. "You aren't done yet. Vance. Not even close." When Julian returned home, he left his phone on the kitchen counter to pour himself a drink. I signaled Rook, who had parked down the street. We had 30 seconds. I distracted Julian with a question about dinner, while Rook remotely pushed a spyware package onto the device via a brute force Bluetooth link we had set up. Now, we could hear everything. But the most devastating blow came that evening. I went to visit Mia at my sister's house. I needed to see her, to hold her. We sat in the guest room, and I asked her gently why she had been so afraid of Julian the day of the shooting. Mia curled into a ball, pulling her knees to her chest. "I saw them, Mom," she whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. "A few weeks ago. Dad and that woman, Sienna. They were arguing in the car outside my school. When Dad saw me, he grabbed my arm. He hurt me." She pulled up her sleeve to reveal a faint, yellowing bruise. He said if I ever told you I saw them, he would make you disappear." She sobbed, her voice breaking. "He said, Mom is fragile. Mia, we don't want her to have an accident, do we? I was so scared he would hurt you." The rage that ignited in my chest was not hot. It was absolute zero. Julian had not just stolen money or killed a criminal associate. He had terrorized our daughter to cover his tracks. The man I had married was dead. The thing living in my house was a monster, and I was going to skin him alive, layer by layer. The pieces of the puzzle did not just fall into place, they slammed together with the force of a head-on collision. Rook sat across from me in his mobile surveillance van, the interior smelling of stale coffee and ozone. He spun a laptop around to face me, his expression grim. "It is not just gambling debt, Alara," Rook said, tapping the screen. "It is embezzlement on an industrial scale. Julian and Sienna have been siphoning funds from a massive commercial construction project for 18 months. Your husband's software company. It is a laundry machine. They are washing dirty money through fake consulting contracts." I stared at the spreadsheets. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars moving like ghosts through shell companies. "And Cale?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Cale was their muscle," Rook explained. "He intimidated subcontractors into keeping their mouths shut about the missing materials. But he got greedy. He figured out how much Julian and Sienna were actually stealing, and he wanted a bigger cut. The break-in was not a break-in at all. It was a payoff meeting that went south. Cale likely got aggressive, and Julian panicked, and Sheriff Cobb Rook sighed and pulled up another document. It was a bank statement for a consultancy firm registered to Cobb's wife. Monthly payments from Sienna's shell company, $2,000 a month for security consulting. Cobb is not investigating the murder because he is paid to mop up the mess. I felt bile rise in my throat. I was trapped in a house with a murderer, in a town policed by his accomplice. When I returned to my office at Vanguard Heritage later that day, a package was waiting on my desk. It was wrapped in brown paper with no return address. I cut the tape with my scalpel. Inside lay a porcelain doll, one of those cheap antique knockoffs. Its head had been twisted around 180 degrees until the neck snapped. Tucked under its arm was a note scrawled in red marker. "Stop before it is too late." I dropped the box, my hands shaking. I ran to the window. Down on the street, parked across from the museum entrance, was a black sedan with tinted windows. It had been there yesterday, too. And the day before, they were watching me. I called Rook immediately. "They are getting nervous." "Ilara," Rook said, his voice urgent over the line. "You are the only person who can access the joint assets and the home equity. They need that money to plug the hole in the construction fund before the auditors arrive next week. If you die, Julian gets everything. He gets the liquidity he needs to stay out of prison." "He wouldn't," I said, though I no longer believed it. "He's weak, but he isn't. He couldn't plan that." "Listen to this," Rook said. "I pulled this audio from the bug in his car 20 minutes ago." The recording hissed, and then Sienna's voice cut through, sharp and cold as ice. "Your wife is sniffing around. Julian, she knows about the alarm. She knows about the money. We are out of time." I can fix it," Julian's voice replied, sounding pathetic and terrified. "She trusts me. I just need more time." "We don't have time." Sienna snapped. "We need to accelerate Plan B. Take her to the lake. The dock is old. Boards rot. People slip. It happens all the time. I can't just—" "Do you want to go to jail?" "Julian, do you want to be someone's girlfriend in a federal prison? Because that is what happens if we don't get that insurance payout and the house equity. Fix it. This weekend." The recording ended. I stood in my office, the silence ringing in my ears. Plan B, a slipping accident. That evening, I walked into the kitchen to find Julian chopping vegetables. He looked up and smiled, a mask of domestic perfection that made my skin crawl. "Hey, honey," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. I was thinking, we have both been so stressed lately, with the break-in and the police and everything. Maybe we need to get away, just for a couple of days. I gripped the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. "Oh," I managed to say. "Where were you thinking the cabin at Lake Blackwood?" he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "It's quiet there, secluded. We can drink some wine, sit by the water, and just heal. It would be good for us." A cold shiver raced down my spine, sharper than any winter wind. He was inviting me to my own execution. That sounds perfect, Julian. I lied, forcing a smile that felt like it was carved out of glass. "Let's go." The house became a stage, and we were the actors in a grotesque domestic play. Julian was performing the role of the doting husband with terrifying dedication. He bustled around the bedroom, folding my thick wool sweaters and checking the weather forecast for the mountains. He hummed a soft tune as he packed, stopping occasionally to touch my arm or brush a stray hair from my face. But the moment I turned my back to organize my vanity, I could feel the weight of his gaze. It was not the look of a man admiring his wife. It was the cold, calculating assessment of a predator watching its prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I forced a smile onto my face, a mask that felt tight and foreign. "This trip is a wonderful idea. Julian," I said, my voice sounding cheerful despite the bile rising in my throat. "I really need the fresh air. I know you do." "Baby," he replied, his eyes dark and unreadable. "It will be just us. No distractions." While he loaded the car, I went into overdrive. I was not packing for a vacation. I was packing for war. I slipped a canister of pepper spray into the lining of my winter coat. I taped a micro recorder, no bigger than a stick of gum, to the underside of my purse strap. I enabled real-time location sharing on my phone and synced it directly to Rook's secure server. Mia knew. She did not know the details, but she had the survival instinct of a child who had seen too much. She cornered me in the hallway while Julian was in the garage. Her face was pale, her hands gripping my forearms with surprising strength. "Mom, please don't go," she begged, her voice trembling. "I have a bad feeling, a really bad feeling. Just stay here. I have to go. Honey," I whispered, pulling her into a fierce hug. "It is the only way to fix this, but you are going to Aunt Sarah's house. I need you safe." "But Mom..." "Trust me, Mia." I sent her away with my sister an hour later, watching the car disappear down the street with a heavy heart. With Mia safe, I could focus entirely on the monster living in my house. That evening, I went upstairs to check my toiletries bag. I had left it unzipped on the bathroom counter. When I picked it up, something rattled that had not been there before. I dug through the cotton balls and face cream until my fingers closed around a small, unmarked orange prescription bottle. Inside were a dozen blue pills. I pocketed one and flushed the toilet to cover the sound of my movement. 10 minutes later, I told Julian I needed to run to the pharmacy for travel-sized shampoo. I met Rook in the alley behind the drugstore. He ran the pill through a portable chemical analyzer. "It is a high-dose sedative," Rook said, his face grim in the dashboard lights. "Combined with alcohol, this causes respiratory depression. You stop breathing. If he gives you 2 or 3 of these, you won't wake up." It wasn't going to be a push down the stairs. Julian was too cowardly for violence that required physical struggle. He was going to poison me, let me drift off into oblivion, and then roll my body into the lake to make it look like a drunken accident or a suicide. I returned home, my blood running cold. That night, I lay in bed next to the man I had shared my life with for 15 years. He was turned away from me, whispering into his phone, thinking I was asleep. "Saturday night," Julian murmured, his voice barely audible. "Yes, when she drinks the wine. I have the bottle ready. It will be painless. She won't feel a thing." I lay there in the darkness, staring at the back of his head. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was not lying next to a husband. I was lying next to an executioner who was too weak to even look me in the eye while he planned my death. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to visualize exactly how I was going to destroy him. The drive to Lake Blackwood felt less like a vacation and more like a funeral procession. The paved roads gave way to gravel that crunched loudly under our tires, and the dense pine forest swallowed us whole, blocking out the gray sky and cutting off the last bar of signal on my phone. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, the sun was already dipping below the tree line, casting long, skeletal shadows across the wooden porch. The air here was thin and cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. I stepped out of the car and adjusted the strand of hair covering my right ear. Tucked snugly inside my ear canal was a device that looked like a hearing aid but functioned as a military-grade receiver. "Audio is clear." "Ilara," Rook's voice echoed in my head, crisp and grounding. "Video feeds are live in the living room and kitchen. We have eyes on the dock. We are right behind you in the tree line." Knowing Rook and his team had arrived hours earlier to rig the house gave me the courage to walk through the front door. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it from happier times, but now the rustic charm felt menacing. The fireplace was cold. The furniture was draped in dust sheets that looked like shrouds. Julian was vibrating with nervous energy. He did not unpack. He paced the length of the living room, checking his watch every 30 seconds and glancing at his phone, which he had connected to the cabin's satellite Wi-Fi. He was a man waiting for a deadline. "It is a bit chilly," he said, his voice too loud in the small space. I will get the fire going." I sat on the dusty sofa, feigning a wince as I rubbed my temples. It was time to bait the trap. "Julian," I said, letting my voice drag with exhaustion, My head is killing me. The stress. It is all just catching up to me. Do we have any wine? I think I just need a glass and maybe a nap. He froze. I saw the muscles in his back tense before he turned around. A look of relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by his mask of concern. Of course, honey, he said, rushing to the kitchenette. I brought that Pinot Noir you like. You sit, relax. I will take care of everything. I watched him from the reflection in the darkened window. His hands were shaking so badly that the bottle neck chattered against the glass rim. He reached into his pocket. I could not see the pill, but I saw the quick, jerky motion of his thumb dropping something into the dark red liquid. He swirled the glass, staring out the kitchen window into the pitch-black forest, searching for headlights that weren't there yet. Target vehicle approaching. Rook's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. Black SUV. 1 mile out. It is Sienna. And Ilara. She brought a cleaner. Big guy. Looks like Boyd. He is carrying a tool bag. My heart slammed against my ribs. Boyd. The replacement for Kyle. They were not just here to stage an accident. They were here to ensure it happened. Julian walked back to me, holding the glass out like a peace offering. Here you go, he said, his smile tight and trembling. Drink this. It will help you sleep. Thank you, I whispered. I took the glass, feeling the cool condensation against my palm. Julian turned back to the fireplace, kneeling to stack logs on the grate. He was avoiding looking at me while I supposedly drank my death. I seized the moment. I tipped the contents of the wine glass into the large potted fern beside the sofa. The red liquid disappeared into the dry soil instantly. I waited 2 minutes, counting the seconds in my head, before I began my performance. I let the empty glass slip from my fingers, landing on the rug with a dull thud. Julian, I slurred, letting my head loll back against the cushions. I feel so weird. The room is spinning. He spun around, his eyes wide. He watched me with a mixture of horror and anticipation as I tried to stand up. I stumbled, knocking into the coffee table, and let my legs give out, collapsing back onto the sofa. I made my eyelids flutter and then droop heavy. Ilara, he asked, stepping closer but not touching me. I let out a soft, incoherent moan and went limp, letting my breathing slow to a shallow, rhythmic rasp. He stood over me for a long moment. I could hear his ragged breathing. He poked my shoulder, tentatively at first, then harder. I did not react, satisfied that I was unconscious. He pulled out his phone. His voice, when he spoke, was a chilling combination of cold detachment and the pathetic tremor of a coward. She is done, he said into the receiver. Yeah, she is out cold. Just get here. I want this over with. The front door groaned open, bringing a gust of freezing wind into the cabin that cut through my sweater, but I forced my body to remain completely limp. I kept my eyes shut, my breathing shallow and rhythmic, mimicking the deep sleep of the drugged. The heavy tread of boots on the floorboards announced their arrival. Is she out? The voice belonged to Sienna. It was sharp, impatient, and devoid of any humanity. Yes, yes. I think so, Julian stammered. She drank it 10 minutes ago. She went down fast. I heard the rustle of papers being thrown onto the coffee table. Good, Sienna said. Here is the updated will. I forged her signature this morning. Once she is gone, the estate transfers to you, and the insurance payout will cover the deficit before the auditors even open their laptops on Monday. I don't know if I can watch, Julian whispered, his voice trembling. The sound of a sharp slap echoed through the room. Pull yourself together, Julian Sienna hissed. You are pathetic. You wanted the money, didn't you? You wanted to save your precious reputation. Well, this is the price. Boyd, get the rope. Got it. A deep, gravelly voice grunted. This was Boyd, the cleaner. I heard the clinking of metal tools and the heavy thud of a coil of rope hitting the floor. "What is the plan?" Boyd asked. "We take her to the dock," Sienna explained, her tone as casual as if she were discussing a dinner menu. "We tie the weights to her ankles. The story is simple. The trauma of the break-in was too much for her. She came up here to clear her head, got drunk, and walked into the lake. A tragic suicide. No one will question it. Every muscle in my body wanted to scream, to leap up and fight, but I commanded my limbs to stay heavy. I needed them closer. "Get her up," Sienna ordered. Heavy footsteps approached the sofa. A shadow fell over my face, blocking out the dim light from the fireplace. The smell hit me first. It was a nauseating mix of stale tobacco smoke, old sweat, and damp wool. Boyd leaned over me, his breathing heavy and wet. Rough hands grabbed me under the armpits. He hoisted me up with brutal efficiency, treating me like a sack of grain rather than a human being. My head lolled back, and I opened my eyes. Boyd was inches from my face, his eyes dull and glassy. He blinked, confusion registering for a fraction of a second as he realized I was staring right back at him. "Surprise," I whispered. I whipped my right hand out from my sleeve, clutching the small canister of military-grade pepper spray I had concealed there. I jammed the nozzle toward his face and pressed the trigger. A stream of bright orange chemical fire erupted, coating his eyes and nose instantly. "Ugh!" Boyd roared, dropping me as he clawed at his face. My eyes I can't see. I hit the floor hard but scrambled to my feet instantly, adrenaline flooding my system and erasing the feigned lethargy. I didn't look back at Julian. I sprinted toward the back door near the kitchen. Rook had told me he had picked the lock hours ago. "What the hell?" Sienna screamed. "She is awake, Julian. Stop her. Do not just stand there. Grab her." I reached the door and risked a glance over my shoulder. Julian was standing in the middle of the room, his face pale and slack with shock. He looked from me to Sienna, his hands twitching at his sides, but his cowardice anchored him to the spot. He could not move. He could not save me, but he could not kill me either. I threw the door open and plunged into the darkness. The cold night air burned my lungs as I leaped off the porch and sprinted toward the tree line. My boots slipped on the wet pine needles, but I kept my balance, aiming for the blinking infrared beacon Rook had described on the comms. "She is getting away," Sienna shrieked. I heard the door slam against the wall behind me. I didn't stop. I dove into the thick brush, the branches whipping against my face and tearing at my clothes. Crack! The sound was deafening, distinct from the thunder. A piece of bark exploded from a pine tree just inches from my ear, showering my cheek with sharp splinters. I gasped, ducking low as I ran. She had a gun, and unlike Julian, she had the will to use it. "You are not getting away from me." "You bitch," Sienna yelled from the porch, her voice distorted by rage. I heard her boots pounding on the wooden steps, followed by the heavy crunch of gravel. She was coming for me, and she was bringing the darkness with her. The forest was a chaotic labyrinth of shadows and biting wind. I scrambled over slick pine needles and exposed roots, my breath tearing at my throat. Behind me, the heavy, crashing footsteps of Boyd echoed like thunder. He was blind and in agony, but he was charging through the undergrowth with the single-minded fury of a wounded bear. A beam of white light slashed through the darkness to my left, missing me by inches, but I did not stop to look back. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech erupted from the trees 10 yards to my right. It was followed instantly by a blinding strobe light that pulsed rhythmically against the trunks of the pines. Rook had activated his perimeter defenses. "Where is that coming from?" Boyd roared, his voice thick with pain and confusion. He stumbled toward the noise, drawn away from my path by the sensory decoy. I used the diversion to veer sharply toward the lake. The outline of the old boat shed loomed ahead, a rotting wooden structure I had identified on the property map days ago. It was a dead end, but it was the only place where I could force a confrontation on my terms. I burst through the side door, the rusty hinges screaming in protest, and backed into the shadows of the machinery room. I was not alone. Julian stumbled out from behind a stack of old crates. He was soaking wet and shivering, his face a mask of absolute misery. In his right hand, he clutched a small paring knife, but he held it loosely, as if it were a poisonous snake he wanted to drop. "Ilara, please, stop," he sobbed, his voice cracking. I can't do this anymore. Just listen to me." I stood my ground, my back against the cold corrugated metal of the wall. I did not feel fear anymore. I felt only a cold, hard clarity. "Listen to you?" I asked, my voice steady. "Like I listened when you lied about the break-in, like I listened when you told me you loved me while you were poisoning my wine. You are pathetic, Julian. You let that woman threaten Mia. You let her hurt our daughter." The mention of Mia hit him like a physical blow. He crumpled, the knife lowering to his side. I didn't know how to stop it. I am in too deep, Ilara. They were going to kill me too." "You are already dead, Julian," I said, stepping closer, my eyes boring into his. "You died the moment you chose money over your family. You are nothing but a hollow shell." "Shut up." The scream came from the main entrance. Sienna stood there, her silhouette framed by the moonlight reflecting off the lake. She held a pistol with a steady, practiced grip, aiming it squarely at my chest. Her hair was wild, her eyes wide with the manic desperation of a gambler who had lost everything. "Do it, Julian!" she shrieked. "Cut her throat!" "Do it right now, or I swear to God I will put a bullet in your brain and do it myself." Julian looked at her, then back at me. He was trembling so violently that the knife rattled in his hand. He looked at the woman who had promised him wealth and the wife he had betrayed. He was paralyzed by his own cowardice. "He can't do it, Sienna," I taunted, keeping my eyes on the gun. "He doesn't have the guts. You picked a weak partner." "Then I guess I have to clean up the mess," Sienna snarled, adjusting her aim. I saw her finger tighten on the trigger. I didn't hesitate. I kicked a rusted kerosene drum that was sitting near my feet. It clattered loudly across the concrete floor, rolling directly toward her shins. At that exact second, the world turned white. "State police! Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" The voice boomed from a loudspeaker outside, shaking the thin walls of the shed. High-intensity floodlights blasted through the windows and the open door, blinding everyone inside. Rook had timed it perfectly. Sienna screamed, squinting against the glare. She stumbled back as the drum hit her legs, but she did not drop the gun. Instead, a look of pure, nihilistic hatred crossed her face. She raised the weapon again, blindly aiming in my direction. "Ilara!" Julian screamed. In a moment that defied 15 years of weakness, Julian launched himself forward. He didn't run away. He didn't hide. He threw his body directly at Sienna just as the gun flashed. The crack of the gunshot echoed against the metal walls like a cannon blast, but I felt no pain. The bullet had missed me, tearing through the corrugated tin roof and sending a shower of rust and dust down upon us. Julian and Sienna crashed to the floor in a tangled heap. Before she could shove him off or aim again, the shed was swarmed. Men in tactical gear, shouting commands that overlapped into a wall of sound, filled the space. These were not Sheriff Cobb's deputies. These were state troopers, the heavy cavalry that Rook had summoned to bypass the rot in our local precinct. Boyd never even made it to the shed. Through the open door, I saw him face down in the mud, A trooper's knee pressed firmly into his spine as handcuffs clicked into place. Sienna fought like a trapped animal. She screamed profanities, thrashing as her weapon was kicked away, and her arms were wrenched behind her back. The arrogance that had defined her, the cold, corporate cruelty was gone, replaced by the ugly, contorted mask of defeat. She spat at the officers, her eyes wild, but she was powerless. And then there was Julian. My husband was not fighting. He was on his knees, his hands clasped over his head, sobbing. It was a pathetic, broken sound that cut through the sharp orders of the police. He looked like a child who had broken a vase, not a man who had conspired to murder his wife. As a trooper hauled him to his feet, he looked up. His eyes found mine. Alara. I am sorry. Please, tell them I helped you. He wept, the words bubbling out with snot and tears. I saved you. Didn't I save you? Please, Ilara. I stood there, breathing hard, the adrenaline slowly draining from my system. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 15 years, the father of my child. I searched for any spark of love or pity in my heart, but I found only a vast Arctic silence. I did not speak. I simply watched him with the clinical detachment of a stranger until he looked away, unable to bear the weight of my indifference. Rook appeared beside me, draping a heavy thermal jacket over my trembling shoulders. We got it all. Ilara, Rook said, his voice low and steady. The audio from the car, the video from the cabin, the attempted murder. It is crystal clear. They are going away for a long time. He paused, glancing at his phone. And I just got confirmation from the station. Sheriff Cobb is in custody. We sent the digital packet to the FBI field office an hour ago. He was arrested at his desk. I walked out of the shed and into the clearing. The rain had stopped. I watched as Julian was guided into the back of a cruiser. The door slammed shut, sealing him into his new reality. As the convoy of lights wound its way back through the dark forest, disappearing behind the tree line, I did not cry. The tears I had shed over the last few days had dried up, leaving behind a feeling that was strange and hollow, yet incredibly light. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were steady as I dialed my sister's number. Hello. Her voice was frantic. Put Mia on, I said softly. A moment later, my daughter's breathless voice came on the line. Mom, I am okay. Baby, I whispered, looking up at the break in the clouds where a few stars were beginning to shine. I am safe. It is all over now. I hung up and stood there for a long moment. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing, pine-scented air. It burned, but it felt like life. My beautiful house was a crime scene, my marriage was a lie, and my bank accounts would likely be frozen for months. But standing there in the dark, I realized I still had the only things that truly mattered. I had my life, I had my daughter, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.